Jake Martinez stared at the holographic application form floating above his kitchen table, wondering if he'd finally lost his mind. The text glowed in soft blue letters: Interspecies Cultural Exchange Program, Human Host Application. Below it, a cheerful animated alien waved 6 tentacles in what the translation software assured him was a friendly greeting. "This is insane," he muttered, taking another sip of his coffee. The rent for his 2-bedroom apartment in Neo Francisco had just increased again, and his job at the data analysis firm barely covered his expenses. The program offered 5,000 credits per month to host an alien exchange student. It seemed too good to be true. His finger hovered over the submit button. 3 months ago, First Contact had changed everything. The galactic community had revealed itself to humanity, offering trade, technology, and cultural exchange. Most humans were still adjusting to the idea that they weren't alone in the universe. Jake pressed submit. 2 weeks later, he stood in his living room, nervously straightening cushions for the 3rd time. The doorbell chimed with an unfamiliar musical tone that made his teeth ache slightly. Through the smart glass window, he could see a tall, elegant figure waiting patiently. He opened the door and tried not to stare. The alien was humanoid but distinctly otherworldly. She stood about 6 feet tall with pale purple skin that seemed to shimmer in the afternoon light. Her face was angular but beautiful, with large silver eyes that reflected everything around them like mirrors. What appeared to be hair cascaded down her shoulders in flowing tendrils that moved independently, as if underwater. "You must be Jake Martinez," she said, her voice carrying a musical quality that reminded him of wind chimes. "I am Zephyra of House Luminous, from the planet Etherealis. Thank you for accepting me into your dwelling." Yeah. Hi. Come in." Jake stepped aside, still processing her appearance. The translation implant behind his ear was working perfectly, but her formal speech pattern felt strange. Zephyra glided into the apartment, carrying what looked like a single metallic suitcase that hovered beside her without any visible support. Her movements were fluid and graceful, like a dancer who had trained in low gravity. "Your habitat is quite charming," she said, examining the living room with genuine interest. "The arrangement of furniture suggests a preference for comfort over formal presentation. Most intriguing. Thanks, I think." Jake closed the door and watched as she continued her inspection. "So, the program coordinator mentioned you're here to study human culture?" "Indeed. I am a xenosociologist specializing in emotional and social bonding patterns across species. Earth's recent inclusion in the galactic community has made human behavior a subject of considerable academic interest." Jake nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what xenosociology involved. "Well, make yourself at home. Your room is down the hall, 2nd door on the right. I cleared out the closet and put fresh sheets on the bed." Zephyra's silver eyes focused on him with an intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable. "You are most considerate, Jake Martinez. I believe this arrangement will prove mutually beneficial." Something in her tone suggested she meant more than just the living situation, but Jake pushed the thought aside. He was probably just nervous about living with an alien. The first few days passed surprisingly smoothly. Zephyra was a quiet, respectful roommate who kept her belongings organized and never hogged the bathroom. She spent most of her time either reading on a device that projected text directly into her eyes or observing Jake's daily routines with the fascination of a scientist studying a new species. Which, Jake realized, was exactly what she was doing. "You consume heated bean water every morning at precisely 7:30, she noted on their 4th day together, appearing in the kitchen doorway as he prepared his coffee. "Is this a religious ritual?" Jake nearly dropped his mug. "It's just coffee. Caffeine helps me wake up." "Fascinating. And, the precise timing suggests an internal biological clock that governs your daily patterns." She moved closer, her silver eyes studying his face. "Your pupils are dilated, indicating the beginning stages of consciousness. The heated bean water accelerates this process?" "Something like that." Jake was getting used to her scientific observations, though being analyzed over his morning routine still felt weird. "Want to try some?" Zephyra's head tilted in consideration. "My species processes stimulants differently than humans, but I would be honored to participate in your morning ritual. Jake poured her a small cup, adding cream and sugar without asking. When she took her first sip, her entire body seemed to shimmer, the tendrils of her hair rising and swaying as if caught in a breeze. "This is extraordinary," she whispered, her voice taking on a deeper, more melodious tone. "The combination of bitter and sweet flavors creates a most pleasant sensation. I understand now why you repeat this ritual daily. Glad you like it." Jake watched her savor the coffee with an intensity that made him wonder if aliens experience taste differently. "Feel free to make some whenever you want. I'll show you how to use the machine. You would share your morning ritual with me? This is most generous." Zephyr's silver eyes seemed to brighten, though Jake couldn't be sure if that was possible or just his imagination. As the days turned into weeks, Jake found himself genuinely enjoying Zephyr's company. She was curious about everything, from human cooking to television shows, approaching each new experience with the enthusiasm of someone discovering wonders. Her questions, while sometimes uncomfortably perceptive, helped him see his own life from a new perspective. "Why do you return to the same employment location each day?" she asked one evening as they sat watching a nature documentary. "Your tasks could be completed from this dwelling using your communication devices. Office culture, I guess. My boss likes having everyone in the same place." Jake paused the documentary, a stunning sequence about deep-sea creatures that had captured Zephyr's complete attention. "Plus, I'd probably go crazy staying home all the time." "Crazy?" Her head tilted in that characteristic way that meant she'd encountered another human concept requiring explanation. "Mentally unstable. Lonely. Humans are social creatures. We need interaction with others. Ah, yes. Social bonding requirements." Zephyra turned her full attention to him, and Jake felt that familiar flutter of nervousness under her intense gaze. "Your species forms complex emotional connections to prevent psychological degradation." "Most logical. When you put it like that, it sounds kind of clinical. Forgive me. I sometimes forget that humans experience these bonds as something more than mere survival necessity." She moved closer on the couch, her movements creating a subtle shimmer in the air. "Tell me, Jake Martinez, do you form these bonds easily?" Something in her voice had changed, becoming softer, more intimate. Jake found himself studying her face, noticing details he'd missed before. Her skin wasn't just purple but contained flecks of silver that caught the light like embedded stars. Her silver eyes held depths that seemed to go on forever. "Not really," he admitted. "I'm pretty selective about who I let close. And yet you opened your dwelling to a complete stranger from another world. This suggests either poor judgment or remarkable trust." Jake laughed. "Probably a little of both. Though you're not really a stranger anymore." "No," Zephyra agreed, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "We are not strangers." The moment stretched between them, charged with something Jake couldn't quite identify. Then, Zephyra's communication device chimed, breaking the spell. She glanced at the floating display with obvious reluctance. "I must attend to some academic correspondence," she said, rising from the couch with her usual fluid grace. "Thank you for sharing your evening entertainment ritual with me." After she disappeared into her room, Jake sat alone on the couch, trying to figure out what had just happened. The conversation had felt like something more than scientific observation, but he wasn't sure what. Maybe living with an alien was affecting his judgment. The next morning, Zephyra wasn't in the kitchen for their usual coffee routine. Jake prepared his cup alone, surprised by how much he missed her presence. When she finally emerged from her room, she seemed different somehow. More reserved, more formally polite. "Good morning, Jake Martinez. I hope you slept adequately." "Morning. Everything okay? You seem distant." Zephyra paused in her movement toward the coffee machine, her silver eyes meeting his briefly before looking away. "I received communication from my academic supervisor last evening. There has been a development in my research parameters." "What kind of development?" She hesitated, her hair tendrils moving in agitated patterns. "It appears that my initial study focus has proven insufficient for comprehensive understanding of human social bonding. My supervisor has suggested expanding the scope of my investigation. That sounds like academic speak for something specific. Indeed. Zephyra turned to face him fully, her expression serious. Jake Martinez, I must ask you something of considerable importance, and I fear your response may alter our current living arrangement. Jake set down his coffee cup, suddenly, alert. What is it? My people have observed that human emotional bonds often include a component that other species find perplexing. You call it romantic love, though our translation matrices struggle with the precise meaning. It appears to be a combination of emotional attachment, physical attraction, and something your scientists term pair bonding instincts. Okay. Jake wasn't sure where this was heading, but he had a growing suspicion he wouldn't like it. To truly understand human social dynamics, my supervisor believes I must experience this phenomenon firsthand. She has suggested I conduct what she terms an intimacy trial with a willing human subject. Zephyra's skin seemed to darken slightly, which Jake was beginning to recognize as the alien equivalent of blushing. I have been authorized to offer substantial compensation for such cooperation. Jake stared at her, his coffee growing cold in his hands. You're asking me to fake a romantic relationship with you? For science? Not fake, Zephyra said quickly. The emotional responses must be genuine for the study to have validity. I am asking if you would be willing to explore the possibility of such a connection, understanding that it serves both research and personal purposes. Personal purposes? Now Zephyra's skin definitely darkened, and her hair tendrils moved in what Jake was learning indicated embarrassment or nervousness. I must confess that my interest in this research developed partially from my observations of you specifically. Living in close proximity has allowed me to study your behavioral patterns, your kindness, your humor. I find myself curious about the deeper connections your species forms. Jake felt his heart rate increase. So this isn't just about your research. No. It is not just about research. Zephyra moved closer, her silver eyes holding his gaze. I have never experienced the type of emotional bond humans describe as romantic love. My species forms connections, but they are based on intellectual compatibility and reproductive necessity. What you call love appears to be something entirely different. It is different. Jake's mouth felt dry. It's complicated, messy, wonderful, and terrifying all at the same time. Yes. This is precisely what I wish to understand. Not merely observe, but experience. She reached out slowly, her fingertips barely brushing his arm. Her touch was warm and sent an unexpected tingle through his skin. The question, Jake Martinez, is whether you would be willing to serve as both my research partner and my teacher in this endeavor. Jake looked into her silver eyes, seeing something he'd never noticed before. Beyond the scientific curiosity and alien nature, there was something achingly familiar. Hope, vulnerability, and the same nervous excitement he felt when standing at the edge of something that might change everything. What exactly would this trial involve? Zephyra's expression brightened, though she tried to maintain her scientific composure. We would begin slowly, as I understand human romantic connections develop over time. Perhaps we could engage in what your culture calls dating? I have researched the concept extensively but never experienced it practically. You've researched dating? Thoroughly. I have studied human courtship rituals, romantic gestures, and the progression of intimate relationships. However, theoretical knowledge and practical application are quite different things. Jake couldn't help but smile. Yeah, they definitely are. Dating isn't really something you can learn from a textbook. Which is precisely why I require a willing partner for experiential learning. Zephyra stepped closer, close enough that Jake could smell her subtle alien scent, like ozone and starlight. I understand this is an unusual request, and I do not wish to compromise our current living arrangement if you are not comfortable with the idea. And if I said yes? What happens then? Then, we would explore the development of romantic attachment between our species, documenting the process for my research while genuinely experiencing the emotional connections your kind finds so compelling. Her voice dropped to that whisper tone again. I confess I am both scientifically and personally curious about what it would feel like to be loved by a human. The honesty in her voice hit Jake like a physical force. Here was this brilliant, beautiful alien asking him to teach her about love, and he was surprised to realize how much the idea appealed to him. Not just the physical attraction, though that was definitely present, but the thought of sharing something uniquely human with someone who truly wanted to understand it. This could get really complicated, he warned. Love isn't something you can just turn on and off for research purposes. I understand the risks. My supervisor made it clear that engaging in genuine emotional bonding with a research subject violates several academic protocols. However, she also acknowledged that superficial observation has provided insufficient data for meaningful analysis. So you're willing to risk your academic standing for this? Zephyr's silver eyes met his directly. I am willing to risk my academic standing to understand what you humans call love. And, perhaps, to understand what it might feel like to love and be loved in return. Jake felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition that this moment was going to change everything between them. Okay. Okay? Yes. I'm willing to try this intimacy trial thing. He smiled, feeling nervous and excited and slightly terrified. But we do this right. If we're going to explore human romantic connection, we do it authentically, not as some sterile experiment. Zephyr's entire body seemed to light up, her skin shimmering with excitement and her hair tendrils moving in graceful, joyful patterns. You truly mean this? I mean it. But, Zephyra? If we're going to do this, there's something you need to understand about human relationships. What is that? They're unpredictable. I can't promise you'll get the neat, orderly data you're expecting. Love is messy and irrational, and sometimes it doesn't make any scientific sense at all. I would be disappointed if it did, she said softly. The most worthwhile discoveries often defy initial hypotheses. Jake reached out and took her hand, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. Her skin was warm and smooth, with a texture unlike anything he'd ever touched. Then, I guess we're both about to make some discoveries. As their fingers intertwined, Jake realized that his life had just taken a turn toward something completely unprecedented. He was about to enter a romantic relationship with an alien scientist who wanted to study love by experiencing it firsthand. It should have been the strangest, most uncomfortable situation imaginable. Instead, looking into Zephyr's hopeful silver eyes, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. 3 days after their agreement, Jake found himself standing outside Café Luna, nervously adjusting his collar for the 5th time. He'd suggested they start with something simple, a coffee date in public where they could talk and get comfortable with the idea of being more than roommates. Now he was wondering if taking an alien on a date to a crowded cafe was the smartest idea he'd ever had. Zephyra appeared beside him with her characteristic silent grace, and Jake's breath caught. She'd done something different with her appearance. Her usual flowing garments had been replaced with a dress that managed to look both elegantly alien and surprisingly human. The fabric seemed to shift colors as she moved, cycling through shades of deep purple and silver that complemented her skin tone perfectly. Her hair tendrils had been arranged in a complex pattern that somehow suggested both sophistication and playfulness. You look. Jake started, then stopped, unsure how to finish the sentence. Different? Zephyra asked, her silver eyes watching his reaction carefully. I researched appropriate attire for human courtship rituals. Was my interpretation incorrect? No, you look beautiful. Really beautiful. The words came out more honestly than Jake had intended, but Zephyr's skin brightened with what he was learning to recognize as pleasure. Thank you. You also appear quite attractive in your formal clothing. She gestured toward his button-down shirt and slacks. Shall we proceed with our first official dating experiment? Jake opened the cafe door for her, noticing how several patrons looked up as they entered. Zephyr's appearance was striking enough to draw attention even in a city that was slowly growing accustomed to alien visitors. She seemed oblivious to the stares, focusing instead on examining the cafe's atmosphere with scientific interest. The lighting is subdued, and the furniture arranged to facilitate intimate conversation, she observed as they found a corner table. The ambient noise level provides privacy while preventing complete isolation. Clever design for encouraging social bonding. You're analyzing the cafe? Jake asked, amused despite his nervousness. I am analyzing everything. This is my first experience with human courtship behavior in its natural environment. Zephyra seated herself with fluid grace, her silver eyes taking in every detail around them. I wish to understand not just the activities themselves but the emotional responses they generate. A server approached their table, trying not to stare too obviously at Zephyra. Welcome to Café Luna. Can I start you off with something to drink? 2 coffees, please, Jake said. 1 with cream and sugar, 1 black. After the server left, Zephyra leaned forward slightly. You ordered for me. In my research, this appeared to be either a gesture of consideration or an assertion of dominance, depending on context. Which was your intention? Jake realized that dating someone who analyzed every gesture was going to be more challenging than he'd anticipated. Consideration, I hope. I remembered how you liked your coffee. You retained specific information about my preferences and applied it without being asked. Zephyra's expression brightened. This suggests attentiveness and care for my comfort. Most promising data. Could you maybe try not to think of me as a research subject while we're on a date? Jake asked gently. I mean, I know this is partly for your studies, but if we're going to explore genuine connection, you might need to let yourself just experience things instead of analyzing them constantly. Zephyra blinked, her hair tendrils moving in patterns Jake was learning indicated deep thought. You are correct. Excessive analysis may interfere with authentic emotional development. She straightened in her chair, visibly trying to shift her approach. How does one simply experience a date? Well, you could start by telling me something about yourself that's not related to your research. Something personal. Personal information. Zephyra considered this request seriously. On Etherealis, I have a garden where I cultivate bioluminescent flowers. Each evening, I would sit among them and compose poetry in the old language of my people. It is considered an outdated practice, but I find the combination of natural beauty and linguistic artistry deeply satisfying. Jake felt something shift in his perception of her. You write poetry? Yes, though I suspect it would not translate well. Human poetry relies heavily on rhythm and rhyme structures that do not exist in Etherean verse. Her skin darkened slightly. It is a private hobby. I have shared it with very few individuals. I'd like to hear some sometime, even if it doesn't translate perfectly. I bet it's beautiful. Jake reached across the table and touched her hand gently. Thank you for sharing that with me. The contact sent that familiar tingle through his skin, but this time Zephyra's eyes widened in surprise. That sensation when you touch me, is that normal for human physical contact? You feel it too? Jake asked, surprised. I thought it might just be me. It is quite distinct. Like a pleasant electrical current, but warmer. Zephyra turned her hand palm up, allowing their fingers to interlace. My research mentioned that humans report various physical sensations associated with romantic attraction, but I had not anticipated experiencing them myself. Their coffee arrived, interrupting the moment but not the growing sense of connection between them. As they talked, Jake found himself genuinely enjoying Zephyra's company in a way that had nothing to do with her alien nature. She was intelligent, thoughtful, and surprisingly funny once she relaxed enough to let her personality show through her scientific training. On my world, courtship involves the sharing of light patterns, she explained after Jake had described human dating traditions. Partners synchronize their bioluminescent displays to demonstrate compatibility. The process can take months and involves complex mathematical harmonies. That sounds beautiful, actually. And probably less awkward than human dating. How so? Jake gestured around the cafe, where several other couples sat at various stages of romantic interaction. Look around. See how everyone's trying to figure out if the other person likes them? All the subtle signals and guessing games? Your light pattern thing sounds much more straightforward. But the uncertainty creates anticipation, does it not? Zephyra observed. I notice your heart rate increases when our hands touch, and your pupils dilate when you look at me directly. These physiological responses suggest that the ambiguity may actually enhance the emotional intensity of the experience. Are you analyzing me again? I apologize. The observations are involuntary. Zephyrus squeezed his hand gently. What I meant to convey is that I find your nervous responses quite endearing. Something about the way she said endearing made Jake's chest tighten in the best possible way. You know, for someone who's never experienced romance before, you're getting the hang of this pretty quickly. Perhaps because you are an excellent teacher. Zephyrus' silver eyes held his gaze steadily. Or perhaps because what I feel when I look at you requires no instruction to understand. The conversation grew more personal as the afternoon progressed. Jake found himself sharing things he rarely discussed with anyone: his childhood dreams of becoming an explorer, his fears about getting stuck in a mediocre life, his quiet hope that first contact with aliens might lead to something bigger than his current existence. Zephyra listened with complete attention, asking questions that showed she truly wanted to understand not just what he was saying but who he was as a person. In return, she told him about Etherealis, describing cities that floated among clouds and oceans that glowed with their own light. She spoke of her family's academic traditions and her own desire to bridge the gap between species through understanding. Her passion for her work was evident, but Jake began to see the loneliness underneath it: a brilliant individual who had dedicated her life to studying connections she had never personally experienced. I should probably ask, Jake said as their second round of coffee grew cold, what exactly does an intimacy trial involve? I mean, beyond dating. What are your supervisors expecting? Zephyrus' skin darkened with embarrassment. They have provided me with extensive research parameters covering various aspects of human romantic behavior. Physical affection, emotional vulnerability, long-term pair bonding indicators. She paused, looking uncomfortable. They expect comprehensive documentation of the experience. You have to write reports about us? Yes, though I have successfully argued that overly clinical documentation might compromise the authenticity of the experience. My reports will focus on general observations rather than intimate details. She met his eyes directly. I want you to know that anything deeply personal between us will remain private. Jake felt a wave of relief. Good. Because I don't think I could handle knowing that alien scientists were analyzing my romantic technique. Your romantic technique appears to be quite effective without any analysis required, Zephyrus said with a smile that was becoming increasingly human-like in its warmth. As they walked home together, Jake realized that the afternoon had exceeded his expectations in every way. What had started as an awkward first date with scientific motivations had evolved into something that felt surprisingly genuine. Zephyr's alien nature made her perspective unique, but her curiosity, intelligence, and growing emotional openness made her feel remarkably familiar. Jake, she said as they reached their apartment building. I want you to know that today has been quite extraordinary. Not just as a research experience, but as a personal one. For me too. And we're just getting started. Zephyr's expression grew serious. I must warn you that I may not always understand human emotional customs correctly. If I do something inappropriate or hurtful, please tell me immediately. Same goes for me with alien customs. We're both figuring this out. Jake paused at their door, suddenly, unsure of the appropriate way to end their first date. So, this is usually where I'd wonder about kissing you goodnight, but I have no idea if that's something your species does or if it would be weird or... I have researched human kissing extensively, Zephyrus said softly. The theoretical knowledge suggests it serves both emotional bonding and physical pleasure functions. Theoretical knowledge, huh? Would you be willing to provide practical instruction? Jake's heart rate spiked as he turned to face her fully. Are you sure? I am certain that I would like to experience this particular human custom with you. Jake moved closer, noting how Zephyr's silver eyes seemed to reflect his own nervous excitement. He raised his hand to touch her face gently, surprised by the warmth of her skin and the way her hair tendrils seemed to reach toward him of their own accord. Just so you know, he said softly, first kisses are usually pretty awkward, even between humans. Then, we shall be awkward together, she whispered. Jake leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind. When their lips met, the sensation was unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Her lips were warm and soft, but there was an underlying energy that made his entire body tingle with awareness. The kiss was gentle, exploratory, and over far too quickly. When they separated, Zephyr's skin was practically glowing, and her hair tendrils moved in patterns that seemed to express joy and wonder. That was... She started, then paused. I understand now why humans place such importance on this activity. Yeah? Jake was pleased to note that she looked as dazed as he felt. The physical sensations were quite pleasant, but the emotional impact was far more significant than my research indicated. She touched her lips wonderingly. I felt connected to you in a way I have never experienced before. That's kind of the point. Jake smiled, still feeling the lingering warmth of their contact. So, second date tomorrow? I would very much like that. Zephyr's expression grew playful. Perhaps you could teach me about other human romantic customs? I think I can manage that. As they entered their apartment, Jake realized that their living dynamic had shifted permanently. They were no longer just roommates or research partners. They were two individuals from different worlds who had chosen to explore the possibility of something deeper, and the anticipation of that journey was both thrilling and terrifying. The next few weeks established a pattern that surprised Jake with its normalcy. They went on regular dates, dinner at restaurants, walks through the city, movies that required extensive cultural explanation. Each outing revealed new facets of Zephyr's personality and deepened their connection. She was endlessly curious about human culture but also eager to share her own world's customs and perspectives. More importantly, Jake began to see past her scientific mission to the individual underneath. Zephyr was brilliant and dedicated, but she was also lonely, passionate, and increasingly affectionate. Her initial formal politeness gave way to genuine warmth, and Jake found himself falling for her in a way that had nothing to do with her alien nature and everything to do with who she was as a person. Their physical relationship progressed slowly but steadily. Second kisses led to hand-holding, which led to cuddling on the couch during movie nights. Each new level of intimacy was approached with mutual respect and communication, though Jake could see Zephyr mentally cataloging their experiences even as she participated in them. You're doing it again, he said one evening as they sat together watching a romantic comedy that Zephyr found anthropologically fascinating. Doing what? Analyzing. I can practically see you taking mental notes. Zephyr's skin darkened. I apologize. The habit is difficult to suppress when experiencing new phenomena. What if we made a rule? During personal time together, you have to turn off the scientist part of your brain. No analyzing, no data collection, just being present with me. That would be quite challenging. Observation and analysis are fundamental to my nature. I know. But if we're going to make this work, you need to be able to just be Zephyr sometimes, not Dr. Zephyr the researcher. Jake turned to face her on the couch. I'm not your research subject. I'm your, what are we exactly? The question hung between them, more loaded than Jake had realized it would be. They'd been dating for 3 weeks, spending increasing amounts of time together, growing steadily more intimate both emotionally and physically. But neither of them had defined what they were becoming. I do not know the appropriate human terminology, Zephyr said carefully. Our relationship has progressed beyond friendship but has not yet reached the permanent bonding stage that humans call marriage. What would you call our current status? Boyfriend and girlfriend, maybe? Or dating exclusively? We haven't really talked about whether you're seeing anyone else, though I kind of assumed. There is no one else, Zephyr said quickly. My interest is entirely focused on you, both professionally and personally. More than that, I find I do not wish to explore these experiences with anyone else. Then, I guess we're boyfriend and girlfriend. Jake felt a flutter of nervous excitement saying the words. How does that translate to your language? Approximate life bonding trial partners, Zephyr said with a smile. Though that lacks the emotional warmth of your English terms. Yeah, that definitely needs work. Let's stick with boyfriend and girlfriend. That night, as they prepared for sleep in their separate bedrooms, Jake realized that their relationship had crossed another invisible threshold. They were no longer just experimenting with human romance, they were actively building something together. The thought was both exciting and slightly terrifying, especially given the vast cultural and biological differences between them. But, as he lay in bed, thinking about Zephra's laugh and the way her eyes lit up when she discovered something new about human culture, Jake found that the differences seemed less important than the growing connection between them. Whatever they were building together, it felt worth pursuing. Down the hall, Zephra sat in her room composing her latest research report. But, for the first time since arriving on Earth, she found herself struggling to maintain scientific objectivity. Her feelings for Jake had grown far beyond what her academic protocols anticipated, and she was beginning to question whether she could complete her mission without compromising either her professional integrity or her personal happiness. The intimacy trial was succeeding beyond her wildest expectations, but that success was creating complications she hadn't foreseen. She was falling in love with her research subject, and she had no idea how to resolve the conflict between her academic obligations and her personal desires. The crisis came 6 weeks into their relationship, on a Thursday morning that started like any other. Jake woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Zephra moving around the kitchen, humming something that might have been an Etherian song. He'd grown accustomed to these pleasant domestic mornings, and the thought of starting each day with her had become one of his favorite parts of their evolving relationship. But, when he entered the kitchen, Zephra's usual warm greeting was replaced by tense silence. She stood with her back to him, her hair tendrils moving in agitated patterns that Jake had learned indicated distress. "Morning," he said cautiously. "Everything okay? I received a priority communication from my academic supervisor early this morning." Zephra's voice was carefully controlled, but Jake could hear the strain underneath. "There have been developments regarding my research." Jake poured himself coffee, noting that Zephra hadn't prepared her usual cup. "What kind of developments?" "The Galactic Academic Council has expressed significant interest in my preliminary reports. They wish to accelerate the timeline for my research completion and expand the scope of data collection." Zephra finally turned to face him, and Jake was shocked to see that her usually bright skin had taken on a dull, grayish tone. "They are sending a team of observers to monitor the final phase of my intimacy trial." "Observers?" Jake set down his coffee cup harder than necessary. "What does that mean exactly?" "It means that our relationship will be studied directly by a team of xenopsychologists and behavioral analysts. They wish to document human romantic bonding from multiple perspectives to ensure the validity of my findings." Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. "They want to watch us?" "Not directly observe our private moments," Zephra said quickly. "But they will be conducting regular interviews with both of us, analyzing our behavioral patterns, and documenting the progression of our emotional bond." The lead researcher specifically mentioned interest in what they termed the human love response and its effects on both participants. "Both participants." Jake repeated the words flatly. "So I'm not Jake anymore. I'm a research subject." "You were always part of the research parameters," Zephra said softly, but the words hit Jake like a physical blow. "Right. I guess I forgot that part." Jake moved toward the door, suddenly needing to be anywhere else. "How long have you been planning this expansion?" "I was not planning it. The decision was made by my supervisors based on the quality of data I have been providing." Zephra's voice cracked slightly. "Jake, please understand, this is not what I wanted." "But, you're going to do it anyway." The silence stretched between them, filled with everything Zephra couldn't or wouldn't say. Finally, she nodded. "I have to. My academic standing, my career, my entire future depends on completing this research successfully. If I refuse, I will be recalled to Etherealis in disgrace, and I will never be permitted to return to field research." "And our relationship? What happens to that when your research team shows up?" I do not know." Zephra's admission was barely a whisper. "I have grown to care for you far more deeply than my protocols anticipated. But I cannot abandon my life's work, even for feelings I am only beginning to understand." Jake stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time the impossible position they had created together. "You know what the really messed up part is? I actually thought this was real. I thought we were building something together." "It is real," Zephra said desperately. Whatever my original motivations, what I feel for you now is entirely genuine. But, not genuine enough to choose me over your career. That is not fair. You knew from the beginning that this was part of my research. I knew it started that way. I thought it had become something more. Jake grabbed his jacket and keys. I need some time to think about this. Where are you going? Work. Somewhere I can be around humans who aren't studying me like a lab rat. Jake left Zephyra standing in their kitchen, her skin now completely gray with distress, and spent the day trying to focus on data analysis while his personal life fell apart. His co-workers noticed his mood but were kind enough not to comment, giving him space to work through whatever was troubling him. The problem was, Jake realized as he stared at spreadsheets without seeing them, that his feelings for Zephyra hadn't diminished despite learning about the expanded research. If anything, seeing her genuine distress that morning had only reinforced how much he cared about her. But, the thought of having their relationship dissected by alien scientists made him feel sick with embarrassment and anger. He came home that evening to find Zephyra sitting at their kitchen table, surrounded by holographic displays showing what looked like academic documents and communication logs. She looked up when he entered, her expression hopeful and nervous. I have been researching potential alternatives, she said without preamble. There may be options that neither of us previously considered. Jake sat down across from her, noting that she'd prepared dinner for both of them despite their morning argument. What kind of options? The Galactic Academic Council's interest in my research stems from the unprecedented nature of my findings. Human emotional bonding patterns are far more complex and intense than anticipated, and the fact that I have personally experienced these patterns makes my data uniquely valuable. Zephyra gestured toward the floating displays. However, my research is not the only study of human-alien interaction currently underway. Meaning? Meaning that if I were to withdraw from this specific project, other researchers could continue the work using different methodologies. The loss of my personal data would be significant but not catastrophic to the overall research goals. Jake felt a flicker of hope. Are you saying you could quit? I am saying I could request a transfer to a different research focus. My academic standing would suffer, and I would likely face restrictions on future fieldwork, but I would not be recalled in complete disgrace. Zephyra's silver eyes met his directly. The question is whether such a sacrifice would be worthwhile. That depends on what you'd be staying for. Zephyra's skin brightened slightly, taking on a warmer purple tone. I would be staying for you, Jake Martinez. For us. For the possibility of building something that exists entirely separate from my academic obligations. Jake felt his heart rate increase. You'd give up your research for me? I would give up this specific research project to pursue a different kind of discovery. Zephyra reached across the table, her fingers brushing against his. I have learned that there are some things more valuable than data, and some connections more important than academic advancement. But your career will survive. I am a skilled xenosociologist with unique experience in human-alien interaction. There will be other opportunities, other research projects. Her grip on his hand tightened. But there will only be one you. Jake stared at their joined hands, processing what she was offering. You're sure about this? Because once you make this choice, there's no going back. Your supervisors aren't going to be happy. I have spent my entire life observing connections between species without experiencing them myself. Now that I understand what human love feels like, I cannot return to purely academic study of emotional bonds. It would be like trying to describe color to someone who has never seen while being blind myself. And, you think what we have is worth that risk? Zephyra's expression grew intense, her silver eyes reflecting depths of emotion Jake was still learning to recognize. I think what we have is beyond measurement or analysis. I think it exists in spaces that science cannot fully map. And, I think pursuing it may teach me more about the nature of connection than any research project ever could. Jake felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition of the magnitude of what Zephyra was offering. There's something I need to tell you too. What is that? I love you. The words came out simply, without drama or fanfare, but Jake saw their impact in the way Zephyra's entire being seemed to brighten. Not the alien scientist studying human romance, not the research partner exploring intimacy trials. I love you, Zephyra of House Luminous, who writes poetry in her garden and gets excited about coffee and asks a million questions about everything. I love your curiosity and your kindness and the way you approach everything with complete dedication. Zephyra's skin now glowed with warm purple and silver light, and her hair tendrils moved in patterns Jake had never seen before, joyful, celebratory, alive with emotion. I love you too, she whispered, and Jake could hear the wonder in her voice, as if she were discovering the words for the first time. I love your patience with my questions, your willingness to share your world with someone completely foreign to it. I love how you make me laugh and how you see beauty in ordinary moments. I love that you made me want to choose personal happiness over academic achievement. They sat in silence for a moment, hands clasped across the table, both adjusting to the reality of what they had just admitted. Jake realized that he had never felt as certain about anything as he did about his feelings for Zephyra, regardless of the complicated circumstances that had brought them together. So what happens now? He asked. Now I contact my supervisor and formally request a research transfer. I will face significant academic consequences, but I will be free to pursue personal relationships without professional obligations. Zephyra's expression grew determined. And then, we discover what happens when two beings from different worlds choose to build something together without any scientific protocols to guide them. That sounds terrifying and wonderful. Yes. Exactly like love is supposed to be, according to my research. Jake laughed, the tension of the day finally beginning to release. You know, even when you're choosing love over science, you still sound like a researcher. Some habits will take time to modify. But I am quite motivated to learn. Zephyra stood and moved around the table, settling into Jake's lap with graceful certainty. Perhaps you could provide additional instruction in human romantic behavior? I think I could manage that, Jake said, wrapping his arms around her and marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. Though I should warn you, from here on out, we're both making it up as we go along. Perfect. I have always preferred exploration to following established protocols. When Zephyra contacted her supervisor the next morning, the conversation was as difficult as expected. Dr. Vanalis, the lead xenosociologist overseeing Zephyra's research, was furious about the withdrawal request and made several threats regarding future academic opportunities. But she also acknowledged that forced continuation of the research would compromise data quality and might create diplomatic issues with human authorities. The compromise reached allowed Zephyra to remain on Earth for 6 additional months to complete transition documentation and train her replacement researcher. More importantly, she was granted permission to pursue personal relationships during this period without academic oversight, effectively ending her role as an active field researcher. So you're free? Jake asked after Zephyra finished explaining the agreement. I am free to choose my own path, she confirmed. Though I will need to find new employment and determine my long-term legal status if I wish to remain on Earth permanently. Do you want to remain permanently? Zephyra's silver eyes held his gaze steadily. I want to remain wherever you are, for as long as you will have me. The honesty of her answer took Jake's breath away. Forever works for me. Over the following months, Jake watched Zephyra transform from a focused research scientist into someone more relaxed and genuinely happy. Without the pressure of constant data collection, she allowed herself to simply experience their relationship and explore human culture for the joy of discovery rather than academic obligation. She found work as a cultural consultant for businesses developing alien-human partnerships, using her unique perspective to bridge communication gaps between species. The job was well-suited to her skills and allowed her to continue learning about both cultures without the rigid constraints of formal research. Their relationship deepened in ways that surprised both of them. Without the underlying tension of scientific observation, they were free to argue, make mistakes, and grow together like any couple navigating the complexities of building a life together. Zephyra's alien perspectives often clashed with human customs, leading to discussions that were both frustrating and illuminating. But, perhaps most surprisingly, Jake discovered that Zephyra's scientific background, rather than being a barrier to authentic connection, actually enhanced their relationship. Her natural curiosity and careful attention to detail made her an exceptional partner who noticed and appreciated things that others might overlook. 6 months after Zephyra's research transfer, Jake came home from work to find their apartment filled with the soft glow of bioluminescent flowers. Zephyra had somehow imported samples from her home garden on Etherealis, creating a display that took his breath away. "What's all this?" he asked, moving through the living room to where Zephyra waited beside the glowing plants. "Today marks 1 year since I first arrived at your dwelling," she said, her skin shimmering with nervous excitement. In human culture, such anniversaries are considered significant milestones worthy of celebration. "You remembered our anniversary? I remember everything about our time together. But this celebration serves a dual purpose." Zephyra moved closer, her hands reaching for his. "I have completed all requirements for my transition documentation, and I have been offered permanent residency status on Earth." Jake felt his heart rate spike. "That's incredible news." "Yes, but accepting permanent residency means I can never return to my research career on Etherealis. It means choosing Earth, and you, as my permanent home." Zephyra's expression grew serious. "Before I make this final commitment, I need to know if you are prepared to share your life with someone who will always be fundamentally different from you." "Zephyra, you've been living here for a year. You know I'm prepared for that. Living here temporarily for research purposes is different from choosing to build a permanent life together." "I will never be fully human, Jake. I will always see the world differently, respond to things in ways that seem strange to your culture." "Are you certain you want that level of complexity in your life forever?" Jake looked around their apartment, taking in the alien flowers that somehow made their space feel more like home than it ever had before. He thought about the past year, the misunderstandings that had led to better communication, the cultural differences that had expanded his perspective, the love that had grown stronger despite every obstacle they'd faced. "Zephyra, you want to know what I've learned this year? Love isn't about finding someone just like you. It's about finding someone who makes you want to become better than you were. Someone who sees the world in ways that challenge and inspire you." He pulled her closer, noting how her skin began to glow with happiness. "You've made my life immeasurably richer, not despite your differences but because of them." "And you are certain you wish to continue building this life together?" "I'm certain I can't imagine building it with anyone else." Jake paused, struck by sudden inspiration. "Actually, there's something I need to ask you." He dropped to one knee among the glowing flowers, pulling a small box from his pocket. Zephyra's silver eyes widened in recognition of the human gesture, her hair tendrils beginning to move in joyful patterns. "Zephyra of House Luminous, will you marry me? Will you be my permanent life bonding partner, in whatever terms make sense for both our species?" "Yes," she whispered, then, louder, "Yes, Jake Martinez, I will marry you. I will choose you and this life we have built together, forever." As Jake slipped the ring onto her finger, noting how the earth-made jewelry seemed to enhance rather than clash with her alien beauty, he realized that their love story had become something unprecedented. It was a connection that had begun as scientific curiosity and evolved into something that transcended the boundaries between worlds. When they kissed among the bioluminescent flowers, surrounded by the warm glow of her heritage and the promise of their shared future, Jake understood that they had created something entirely new. Not human love or alien bonding, but something that belonged uniquely to them, a bridge between species built on curiosity, respect, and the radical act of choosing each other despite every reason why it shouldn't work. Their wedding 6 months later was attended by humans and aliens alike, a celebration that required extensive cultural translation but resulted in a ceremony that honored both their backgrounds. Zephyra wore traditional Etherian light silk that shifted colors with her emotions, while Jake wore a simple earth suit that Zephyra had declared perfectly appropriate for such a momentous occasion. The vows they exchanged were their own creation, blending human promises with Etherian bonding traditions. When Zephyra promised to share her light with his journey for all the cycles of their existence, Jake understood that he was receiving something precious beyond measure. And, when Jake promised to love her curiosity, celebrate her differences, and build a life worthy of the courage it took to choose love over certainty, Zephyra knew that her choice to abandon her research for authentic connection had been the most important discovery of her life. As they danced their first dance to music that blended earth rhythms with Etherian harmonics, surrounded by friends from two worlds who had come to celebrate their impossible love, Jake realized that their story had become something larger than either of them. They had proven that connection could transcend species, that love could bridge any gap, and that the most important discoveries weren't always made in laboratories. They had discovered each other, and, in doing so, had discovered new possibilities for what love could be when it refused to be limited by the boundaries others tried to impose on it. Their intimacy trial had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest expectations, not because it had provided scientific data about human bonding, but because it had created something entirely new, a love story that belonged to the space between worlds, where two beings had chosen to meet each other with complete openness and build something beautiful from their differences. In the end, Zephyr's research into human love had taught her that the most profound connections couldn't be studied or analyzed, they could only be lived, one moment of choice and courage at a time. And Jake had learned that opening his heart to someone completely different from himself hadn't diminished his humanity but had expanded it in ways he never could have imagined. Their love story became a symbol within both human and alien communities of the possibilities that existed when beings from different worlds chose curiosity over fear, understanding over judgment, and love over the safety of the familiar. It was a reminder that the greatest adventures often began with the simple decision to trust someone different enough to change everything.